Orchard Human Services, uplifting lives by counseling, educating, and caring. With Dr. Darleen Claire Wodzenski.
Welcome back, Nate Terrell, licensed clinical social worker and author of the amazing book, Achieving Self-Compassion, Giving Yourself the Gifts of Happiness and Inner Peace.
Great to be back. I look forward to continuing our great discussion.
Thank you. This is a book I read. We reached out to each other on LinkedIn. I don't remember who contacted whom, but when I saw you had a book on compassion, I had to get it, had to read it. It's a really big topic for me in my life. I think that compassion has been one of the curative factors for my entire life. And I was so drawn.
Right.
So drawn in.
How do you think you first got into being, what was it about you or your life that drew you to be so compassionate throughout your life?
Well, I had some losses in my early life and a bit of a trauma history. And as a child, I remember by the time I was in about third or fourth grade, I realized that there were some circumstances in my life that I did not know how to improve or make better. And there were some things I was sad about. But when I reached out to other people who seemed to be perhaps not as happy as they could be, suffering, sad, overwhelmed, whatever, and tried to offer some friendship or kindness, that I felt good about it. So even though I didn't have the capacity to create good feelings in myself by solving my own circumstances and problems, because I didn't know how, I could create good feelings in myself, kind to others. And so I think I got hooked from an early age and found that was perhaps the only way that I knew how to create that biochemistry of joy and satisfaction and love within myself.
Beautiful. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so life taught me about the importance of love and compassion.
Beautiful.
You shared an important story about how your son taught you that awareness that compassion is a good thing, but we can't fix everyone else's circumstances.
Absolutely. Yeah, we only have so much time and energy on this planet, and we have to sort of parcel out very carefully where we choose to put our energy, whether it's into ourselves with self-love and self-care, being our own best friend, or whether it's to other people. And highly effective people have a pretty good sense of how to make the best use of this time and energy. And of course, it grows exponentially as we become highly loving, tuned in, hopefully peaceful people. But I learned a long time ago that you can't possibly begin to solve everybody's problems, fix all the issues of the world. I say to my clients, you could go to China and like sweep the streets. There's always more, we can do. But ultimately, as we treat ourselves with self-love and compassion, we are definitely filled with an abundance, as I said in our first conversation, that we could pass on to other people. And that's really, I guess, my epiphany in my life. It's a both and rather than either or, for sure.
Yes. Now, I wonder if we can talk a little bit about creator. Would that be a fair subject?
I'm sorry, about what?
Creator.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm a non-denominational minister as well as a clinical mental health counselor. I do not tell anyone how to worship, whom to worship, but I have a relationship with Creator or God that is very personal to me. And one of the things I love to do is to help other people explore their own concept and their own philosophy and spirituality. And I'm okay with other people referring to Creator or God or the force that funds the universe, however they choose to. So I want to be clear, if I do use a word, I'm not suggesting that anyone else use my word. I'm just explaining what's going on for me.
Right.
One of the big things that happened for me is that I thought, based on, I think the way I was exposed to religion and spirituality in my childhood, that it was very humble and pious to be self-deprecating, to put yourself down. Oh, I'm not worthy. Oh, I'm the mat on the floor. I'm the dirt below the mat on the floor. But then there was a day when I was probably about 32 or 33. I remember the moment distinctly. I sat in a green recliner that my in-laws had gotten for me because I was nursing my children at that time. And it was important to be in a really comfy chair and be able to put your feet up. And so both was a recliner and it rocked. It was this really cool chair. And I sat in that chair while the babies were napping. And I said, okay, and unless the baby wakes up, I am not budging from this chair until I figure out this self-love thing, because I know I don't have it.
Right.
And my attitudes, when I checked my attitudes towards myself, I knew that I was not being loving and kind of Darleen. So I sat there and I opened myself up and just meditated, reflected, went within and contemplated self-love. And I thought, well, let me reach out to the wisdom of the universe, to God. And I reached out and I said, Jesus. Okay, Jesus. There's a figure that is imbued with love, self-love, love for others, love for humanity.
Right.
How do you do self-love? What is that about? How does one even get there? And I got this really cool answer from the universe.
What was that?
The answer was this: just not loving yourself, not valuing yourself and having compassion for yourself is like looking up at God and saying, hey, God, on the day that you made Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, and all the saints, you done real good. But God, on the day you made me, you done screwed up.
Right.
And I went, oh, like, that is so judgmental. That is so, like, I was so full of myself. Who did I think I was, judging one of the creations of the all there is? The creator, God, the all there is, created me. And I'm getting up every day judging this creation. And that is when I stopped it. And over time, I move away more and more. I can't tell you that I was cured, but to a great extent, I stopped being so judgmental of myself that day and started to just observe myself as another person, another spirit in the universe. And so I was able, because of that awareness, to step into a place where self-compassion was even possible.
Yeah, it's so true. So many people, so many of my clients are so hard on themselves, but they're wonderful to everybody else. And I always say to them, don't you think everybody in the world deserves love and care and kindness and goodwill? And they say, absolutely. And then I say, well, aren't you part of the world? Aren't you a person in the world? And usually they say, I never thought about it like that. But in terms of your initial question about the creator, I have been very fortunate to find a deep level of inner peace within me. And sometimes I think of the source, as Wayne and I talked about. Sometimes I think in terms of spirit. Sometimes I think in terms of my deeper, authentic self. I find it when I meditate. I find it when I'm in the woods. I certainly find it in beautiful moments in my life when I'm surrounded by love. And I'm convinced we all have access to that place. It doesn't matter what you call it. A Christian might say, I'm born again. A Buddhist might say, they're enlightened. A nature lover might just say, I'm in the woods and I'm feeling peaceful. It doesn't matter what we call it. Obviously, a rose is still a rose. But it fills us with such a sense of wholeness, with such a sense of being alive. And we always have access to this place, for sure. And so a big part of my work with clients and other people that I minister to is to transcend our thoughts and our feelings, whether it's through visualization, yoga, meditation, doing things we love, finding this place of deep inner peace. And the thing that really has fascinated me is when I find it, I feel very, very close to myself. I feel at one with my own spirit, my own soul, if you will, my own inner energy. I also feel one with everything around me. And it's a both and at the same time. There's a place I go to in the summertime in Florida called Orchard Gardens. It used to be, it's part of a Legoland. It's a theme park, and there's a banyan tree that I love. And I sat underneath it for about 6 hours last June, meditating. And when I came out of my meditation, I literally felt one with every plant, every mosquito, everything in the universe. And that's people have been referring to the same thing, whether it's Rumi, whether it's Jesus, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Muhammad. It's all this, to me, it's all the same thing. And we always have access to it. Nobody can stop us from finding that place. Unfortunately, many people don't realize that place till just before they die. You know, hospice nurses also often say that people begin to smile or even laugh just before they die because they've let loose from all their false fronts and identities, and they've discovered sort of the meaning of life in a paradoxically. I want people to discover it before 5 minutes before they die. And it's available. It's beautiful. And whether you spread the word as a pastor, a minister, or a rabbi, a priest, or whether you just sit in the woods and find your inner peace, again, it's all the same thing. And I can't even fathom my life without it. There's so much of the world we can't change, and we can't let our sense of ourselves go up and down based on the events. Yes. So it sounds like you have this rich inner life that's really compelled you. And how do you spread that out? How do you pass that on to other people without being preachy? I mean, it's so tricky because people don't want to be told what to believe. A lot of times I just share my own experience, and I sort of help guide them to how I got there. But I have to be careful because not everybody gets to it in the same way.
Right. So that's a really good point. I don't typically talk about my spirituality or my philosophies. I explore the spiritual orientations and philosophical beliefs that my clients have.
Right.
And I tend to be very generic where that's concerned.
Right.
Because I believe that as a therapist, my job is to help my client explore their inner meaning.
Right.
But the interesting thing was, I started writing a book probably about 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And as I started to write the book, I got this message that no, go back to school, get a few more degrees. When you got your doctorate, come back and write the book.
Right.
And what happened for me is that I managed moving through a degree, a master's in special ed, a master's in clinical mental health counseling, the doctorate in psychology. And by doing all that, I learned all these different ways to talk about the capacity of the human to be whole, to have compassion, to have theory of mind, to be reflective, empathetic, sympathetic, to have social grace, to be aware of the emotions of self and others, and learned how to talk about it 12 ways since Sunday. And now all of a sudden, I had a new voice and I had a new way to come back to the same topic. So now when I talk about and write about these things, I'm talking about exactly the same things. But back then, I was a very spiritually oriented individual. Now I'm probably even more spiritually rooted, but I don't have to talk about my spirituality. I learned all these other different ways to talk about it in a way that is secular or sacred, depending on the person's orientation. Right. And I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for that gift that the universe gave me.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And yeah, when we live a deeply compassionate life, a deeply peaceful, happy, joyful life, other people are drawn to us. We don't even need to say it. We have to spread that by example, for sure. Unfortunately, so many of the clients I've worked with, particularly those that have suffered severe trauma, are so cut off from their inner peace. They're so cut off from their self-love. They're so cut off from any feeling of abundance or goodwill. And partly it's because their limbic system's firing off and they're brittle or anxious or sort of feel hyped up. Part of it's that they overthink things because they had to overthink how to get out of their bad situations. So a huge part of my work, and it sounds like the same with your work, is to help people get out of their heads, transcend our thoughts and feelings, and find this inner realm, find this abundance, find this ocean. And I use a lot of visualizations. I visualize I get out of the attic of my brain with all my thoughts running around like in wires, and I go through this tunnel out into this abundance. And it's so healing for trauma survivors to realize that they cannot forget the trauma and it's always going to have some effect, but they can find a deeper place within themselves and then deepen and further that place. So I think, like you, I often couch my spirituality in psychological terms. On the other hand, many times clients will flat out ask me, well, how do you see things spiritually? And I'm happy to talk about that. Sometimes people think, oh, therapists should never talk about spirituality. But I find a lot of my clients want to talk about meaning and why we're here and lessons they can learn. So again, I can't fathom my life without this deeper sense of inner peace, and I wish it for everybody, for sure.
And you brought up something interesting earlier today. you had mentioned something about working with trauma.
Right.
And one of the things that's true for me is that as I'm working with someone, I try not to be so much in a cognitive thinking model. Because when people have trauma, the part of their brain that recorded those traumatic moments or that recorded a period of neglect or depression or separation or hurt or loss, those parts aren't so good with cognitive processes. You know, the prefrontal cortex may neurologically downshift and you have less blood flow, you have less electrical activity. So the person really isn't processing and thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it becomes a phenomenological experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my dear friend, Dr. Kathy A. Thomas, who teaches at Nova Southeastern University, is the one who first introduced me to the concept of a phenomenological approach. And it sounded good. I know what the word phenomenon means, but when I really got into it, it's like, wow. So what I try to do is to get into the space with the person and just be with them.
Right.
And maybe match my breath to their breath, mirror their posture, the way they sit, I sit. If they have a faster way of talking and they kind of use a higher pitched voice, I will kind of match theirs a little bit. And then if it's somebody who's a little bit slower and maybe they use a hushed voice, I'll match it. And little by little, I can get into pace with them. And then as I take a breath, their brain notices that we were in pace. And if I just go and just chill for a second, they do too. And all of a sudden, you're having this phenomenological experience where one human, the entire human being, is impacting the entire experience of the other one. And
Right.
then you move into a place of peace.
Right.
And then from that place, you really can get some awesome work done.
Right. And of course, that's the attunement every child should have gotten from their mother or father or caretakers. And it's so powerful. As we've discussed, I have a daughter with a form of autism called Rett syndrome. And we've done a lot of that with her, joining her world, mimicking her behaviors, mimicking her breathing, tapping, putting out her hands for her to tap her hands. And beyond my work with my daughter, I've learned so significantly the way to really connect with somebody is to do exactly what you're talking about. Reflect back, mirror, have our similar body language, tune in, ask open-ended questions. We all long to be gotten. We all long to be validated and taken seriously. And so many of us are so caught up in our own heads, our own opinions, our own beliefs, our own stresses. We just don't have the energy and focus to really tune deeply into somebody else. I often imagine I'm lying on a beach and I let my clients sort of wash over me like a big wave. But the level of attunement that you do with the kids you work with is awesome. And I really think it's the cornerstone of any healing approach. And when I sit with clients who've been traumatized, it's so important to let them just think, to share all of their thoughts, all of their feelings, and not judge them. And not say to themselves, oh, you should be strong or you should be happy, at least initially with trauma survivors. Now, as they begin to recover, obviously I try to focus on mindfulness and self-love. But what you're talking about, I think, is the key to any healing relationship. But you don't have to be a therapist. You could be a bartender or a barber or a taxi cab driver. We all long for that level of attunement. And the kids that you work with, the ones with the attachment disorders, they need it the most. And it must be wonderful for you to see the significant impact that you make. Do you see what happens when you start to see recognition? And maybe it's sort of unconscious or visceral or physiological. What's the process by which these children begin to feel connected and recognize what you're doing? Do they start to relax? Do they smile? What do they do? How do you know that you're being effective with that?
Right. Well, I had a really funny experience one time, and I hope I can articulate it. I was working with a new client, the mom, who had brought her, I think, 3-year-old with her. The identified patient was another child who was not there in the room at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting in front of the mom, leaning forward, using my softest voice. And I asked if I could touch her hand. I said, I'm going to show you how I put your little boy to sleep at night. I would hold his hand and I'd say, oh, sweetheart, mommy's here and you're safe and I love you. And I'm going to touch this little finger. This finger is safe and this finger is safe. And I touched each finger.
All right.
The mom was leaning in and she was really starting to feel that physiological rapport that happens when the brain of one person realizes that they are really connecting with the brain of the other person.
Right.
So her little 3-year-old comes up and sticks out his hand. He wants me to do it to him. So I wasn't thinking. And I looked at the mom and I said, is that okay? She said, sure. So I reached over and got down a little closer. Hey, Sugar Plum, you're safe. And this finger is safe. And this finger is safe. And this one. And you're loved and you're protected. And you can sleep soundly. And all I was doing was demonstrating the technique. And the little child is going, ah. And all of a sudden he stops. And he looks at his mother. And he looks at me. And he throws himself in her lap and starts sobbing. I wasn't thinking. I was in a deep rapport state with the mom. I didn't know this little boy. And for a moment there, I got caught up in the moment. And the moral of the story is this stuff is so powerful that it's more powerful than drugs. Like, you think that you can give somebody Thorazine and like chill them out if they're in a mental health facility and they can't calm down. I think this stuff is more powerful than medication. Better than lithium. Better than Prozac. Right. It is really powerful. But that particular day, I lost track. And by doing it with a little child, I wasn't thinking. He didn't know me. He wasn't ready to be in a deep state of physiological rapport with me.
Was it scary for him, or was it a matter of lack of trust, or what was it that?
It was frightening because he had really connected and opened up. And normally children are a little bit more protective. They you want to talk about energy centers, they close their energy centers. If you want to talk about trust, they don't come really close and have such trust. But he was all in. But this was a typical child, a typically developed child. For children who have neurodevelopmental disorders, like a child with an autism spectrum disorder, there are times I'll have a child jumping on top of me within 30 seconds. I remember being at a park one time and a mom noticed that I was there doing some therapeutic work with another child. And I was sitting at the picnic benches, kind of coaching the child that I brought with me, whom I brought with me, to go and ask others to play, take turns, try new pieces of equipment. And the idea that day was that I was not playing with this child, but rather I was there coaching him so that the client was engaging with other children. So I was holding back. And a mom was there with her little boy. And she said, what are you doing with that little boy? He's so happy and he's listening and following. And we talked a little bit. And she shared that she had a child who was diagnosed with autism and that he didn't speak to anyone except her, and didn't connect with anyone except the parents and maybe the occupational therapist. And I said, well, if he comes over, do I have permission to interact with him? And she said, yes. So he comes over to the table, and right away I noticed he had a movement he was making, just a little movement, and he was making a little peeping noise. So I started doing the thing, and I'm going, and within 30 seconds, he jumps up on the table and throws himself in my arms. And mom was like, what's happening here? And he said, well, I listened to the language and the message your child was broadcasting. Oftentimes I find children who are neurodevelopmentally atypical. So they have atypical neurodevelopmental status. They are speaking another language and presenting themselves in the physical world in an alternate way. So you and I may choose to be upright, keep our heads upright, and walk a certain way. But this child, he had a head tilt and he was doing a little thing. Didn't matter to him that that wasn't what everyone else was doing. And he wasn't making the same sounds as everyone else. He was making his own little peeping noise. And so when I matched those things, he went, oh, she's speaking my language. And so she had to jump up on my lap to find out what was going on, to see what else I had to say. Now, I'd only just met him like 30 seconds ago.
Wow.
So I didn't have too much more to say to him, but we did connect and it was a beautiful moment. And that's not the only time that that's happened. I've gotten hugs and kisses from children that everybody else thought didn't even interact with anyone other than maybe their families at home. And when you make that kind of connection, all of a sudden these children go, wow, She hears me. She's speaking my language. She sees me. She knows I'm here. And it's so exciting. And it's so powerful. More powerful than drugs.
That's such a great metaphor for what we all want, what we all long for, is just to be mirrored in that way. Recently, I was at this place I mentioned earlier called Longwood Gardens, and there was a mom there with her son, and I think he had ADD. He may have been on the autism spectrum, and she wasn't mean to him, but she kept saying, you have to behave, you have to behave. And she had about 5 other kids, and he really seemed to be struggling. So at one point, they were passing us, and I sort of kneeled down, and I said, hi, my name's Nate, what's your name? He told me his name. I asked him a couple of questions, and then he started to follow me. He seemed to be longing for a connection. And it was sort of weird. I don't know. I moved up a little bit ahead of the mom because actually I was looking to find a good place to meditate, and he kind of ran after me. And I don't know the dynamic with his mom. I know she was a loving, caring person. He just seemed to long for the energy I was giving him. And then he said, could I introduce you to my mom so you could talk with my mom? And it was weird. I almost got the feeling she wanted me to talk with the mom about him. And I got this really, really strong connection with him. But again, what these kids with developmental challenges crave is what we all crave, that attunement. Somebody just to hear us, somebody to get us, somebody to understand us, somebody to say, okay, it's okay how you are. It doesn't give people license to go rob a bank or throw a stone through a window. That's not what it's all about. But the level of deep, deep compassion you're talking about, that's the life force that changes the world. I have no doubt about that. I love the work you're doing with these kids, and I'm excited you're opening up a training center. And I guess it's really all about teaching parents how to do this as well, so they can be more attuned to their kids.
Yes.
But it's not just infants, it's younger kids, it's adolescents. I have so many parents I work with that want to lecture their kids or read them the Riot Act. And that there may be appropriate times for that, but I always say to them, can you just ask them a question? Can you just listen? Can you just tune into their vibration? I really think you're far ahead of most of us in this deep, deep level of attunement. You have such a gift to offer the world, and I wish every child could receive what you have to offer.
Well, that's incredibly kind of you to say. I am a student of children. I think that they teach me.
Right.
For every intense thing that I've learned, either as an educator or a clinical mental health counselor or an interventionist, every intense thing I learned, a child taught me. Right. Straight up, that's the truth.
Without a doubt.
And there's a funny thing that I say. It's like my induction of a person into this concept of compassion. Because as you said, sometimes people never even thought about being kind to themselves. They may be really loving, caring people, but they never even thought about turning it on themselves. Right. And so I'll inquire what their concept is of the Creator. Do they use the word God? Do they use the word Allah? How do they refer to the Creator? Do they call it first cause? And so let's say they called it God. So I would then tell them a story. I would say, there was a day that God had an amazing, marvelous thing in mind. A creation that was just the most beautiful, amazing, and special of all things. And then poof, in the next moment, there you were, Nate. There you were. And they stop and they go, that's me.
Right.
Yes. You
right.
were the amazing, wonderful thing. Because I believe that that's how each of us came to be. That right. The force that creates all there is had an amazing idea. And then poof, there each of us came to be.
That's right. And of course, people believe they need to beat up on themselves to motivate themselves to become the best person they can be or overcome their problems. And I say to them, paradoxically, the opposite is true. We can become our best selves. We can overcome things we feel shame and guilt about, let go of our shame and guilt. We can become our best selves by far more easily when we're loving and kind to ourselves. But people are afraid to take that risk. People feel like they have to give themselves a torrent of negative feedback and criticism. We really don't. It just drains our energy. It makes us feel badly about ourselves. And I often say to people, look, even if you feel like you don't deserve deep self-love, do it for other people. I don't say this to make them feel bad, but I say, People who love themselves are a gift to everybody. And so again, even if you feel you don't deserve it, be this way so you have more to give other people, or so that other people can tune in to the wonderful peace and happiness within you. I can be pretty convincing. I don't mean to sound like I'm full of myself, but I often say to people, what is your fear? Now, people often say to me, I'm afraid to be happy. I'm afraid to be peaceful. It's almost as if they like flying too high or spitting in the wind. And I say to them, take the risk. Particular survivors of trauma with their hypervigilance, you know all about this. Their fight flight is firing off constantly. They think they need to be like this all the time to take care of themselves, but they don't. But they have to take the risk of inner peace and happiness to prove to themselves they don't need it. The sky's not going to fall in. And so a big part of my clinical work is helping people take that risk. And I take much better care of myself when I'm peaceful and centered. I do all the things I do to be safe and to eat well and go to the doctor, etc. But people are afraid to take that risk. Of course, a lot of people simply think they don't deserve to be happy. And I say to them, why would somebody deserve to be happy? And they say, oh, I've done these bad things or I made mistakes. And I say, that doesn't mean you don't deserve to be happy. Your chances of not doing things you shouldn't do in the future are much greater if you love yourself, if you're peaceful. People don't do dysfunctional things out of happiness. They just don't. People never say, I was so happy and peaceful, I went and robbed a bank. All the unfair, mean-spirited, prejudiced things people do in this world are out of unhappiness. They're never out of happiness. So as I said, I just rhetorically, I sort of ask my clients these questions. What are they afraid of? There's no person, there's no human being on earth that's ever lived that doesn't deserve to be happy and peaceful, for sure.
That's beautiful. So this brings up a really big question. I don't know if we have enough time to look at this one, but as you know, I work a great deal of the time I work with clients who
Right.
have a trauma background. They may be in the adoption system. They may be involved in child protective services or juvenile justice. Some clients have neurodevelopmental disorders or are neuroatypical, but a great deal of trauma and neglect background. And one of the interesting things is, as you know, having this profound sense of compassion for self and compassion for others is almost like a shortcut to getting connected with the child.
Right.
And when you can get in there and connect with that child, it's just like the child who had been diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, and I peeped and did the movement he did. I was in his world with him suddenly, and he wasn't there alone. So I find the same thing with children with a trauma, abuse, or neglect background. Or maybe they lost their parents through a tragedy. Their parents died in a car accident or something, but something traumatic and dramatic happened. When you can get in their world with them, there's a chance to love them. And as you said, go back and redo that early patterning that the mother does with the child and for the child. And it's so powerful and it's so important. Excuse me 1 second. So we're back again. I'm sorry, someone was returning some keys and it was noisy. So when I'm working with families, sometimes one or both of the parents will themselves have a trauma, abuse, neglect history, or some disruption in their own developmental processes that lead to relationships and trust and really being nurturing. Or sometimes a person has a personality that's very funny, quirky. Sometimes families use humor so much, and they're so good at it, that the typical family members, the children born into the family, do really well and thrive, and they're able to figure everything out socially. They know they're loved and they're cared for. But you bring a child in from the outside who maybe has been through trauma and abuse, and then they are being foster cared or adopted by this new family who uses a lot of humor, and there's not enough of that quiet space. And it's really interesting for me because sometimes I have a two-tiered job where I have to care for the client and I have to get into that space with the client and help them begin to heal. But then if there's no one else in their world who can get into that sacred space, when I leave, I'm abandoning them.
Right.
So the next level happens that I have to find a way to love and nurture and care for the other parents or care providers in that family, so that they can start to connect in that deep space too. So that when I leave, then the parent and the child can connect. And I'm not abandoning the child to be alone again without anyone in their inner space.
Right.
And sometimes this work is really demanding. Sometimes parents just scratch their head and are like, well, what are you talking about? I
Right.
raised all these great kids like I'm a great parent. And I assure them, you're a great parent.
Right.
But this new child you took in has a trauma, abuse, or neglect background and needs something very specific. They need sensitivity and compassion that is so intense that it is not in the normal mainstream life experience. And so sometimes that's hard work for me. And I really wanted to, this is one of the big topics I wanted to talk to you about and get your thoughts on it.
Well, for sure, we need to train the parents, the caregivers, to mirror what you're doing. And other than intensive family work or having a network of people coming into the house that can do it, I don't know what else you can do. I mentioned we had gone to this place called the Option Institute when our daughter Nikki was about 2 years old. And I mentioned earlier, she has a form of autism called Rett syndrome. And they trained us to do a home-based treatment program. And in their model, you actually have other caretakers coming into the house, doing this intensive work, joining the child's world. And we did a lot of that with Nikki. And we did have some other caretakers coming in kind of around the clock program. We worked with our daughter 6 to 8 hours a day for a couple of years. As kids get into adolescence, teenage years, and move into adulthood, so many of the clients that I work with never got the love and care they needed and deserved when they were children. And I say to them, and it's sort of a tragic situation in a way, because it's really unlikely they're going to find an adult partner or a friend or even maybe a therapist who's ever going to give them the level of attunement that they deserved as a child. Because a child's needs are hopefully the sole focus of the caretakers and adults, the mom and the dad, the caretakers. But I say to them, and I've said this so many times to people, you could start giving yourself that love and that care rather than go through the world projecting your needs onto everybody around you. We all do that some. You can turn inward. There's a client I write about in my book who grew up in a very dysfunctional family situation. I won't mention the dysfunction just out of confidentiality to the situation, but she had a dream that she was an egg in a nest, and she kept waiting for somebody to come sit on the nest and nurture her and heal her. And unfortunately, she selected men who were abusive and throw her out of the nest rather than nurture her. And I said to her, you need to give yourself that sort of love. Take great care of yourself. Fill yourself with being your own best friend. You can do it. You're the only person that can do it to that extent. I tried to be as loving and kind and caring. I encouraged her to make friends and go out with healthier men. But ultimately, her neediness often drove people away. She was able to do it. Rather than sort of going through the world like looking for someone to take care of her, I said, be that parent to yourself that you wish you'd always had. And that's a big part of my clinical work. Again, whether it's being your own best friend, setting boundaries, making healthier life choices, however, being in the moment, appreciating what you have, to give ourselves that love. And what I have found in my own life is, as I've become more and more compassionate, self-compassionate, as I've reached deeper levels of healing, I don't project nearly as much onto my wife and onto my friends and family. And it's helped my relationships a lot. I love people. I'm very social. But in some ways, I look at like relationships are like dessert. They're the icing on the cake. They're a wonderful thing of life, but they're not the core. The core is self-love, not a self-love that leads up to be selfish or take somebody else's stuff or be mean or homophobic or prejudiced, but it's self-love that fills us up, because that's what we can control. We can't control other people. It's so easy to demand that other people treat us in a certain way so we can be happy. And I guess that's emotional freedom for me. So I don't know what you could do with your younger kids. I mean, a 2-year-old's not going to be able to take great care of themselves in the way that we're talking about. But as they get older, yes, we could teach them to give themselves what they didn't get, for sure.
Well, and that's really funny because I even teach 2-year-olds to care and love for themselves.
What are some of the ways, how do you do that for 2-year-olds? To learn stress management strategies and deep breathing, and how do you do that with 2-year-olds?
Well, it's really easy. First of all, I try to become timeless as I'm working with them. I try to become someone who doesn't have an age or a gender or even a name. I'm just a person. I'm there loving.
Right.
And then we interact, and I pay attention to all the things that cause them to have a neurological positive response.
Right.
So you can watch their breath change. You can watch the dilation in their pupils change. You can watch them lean in, use more of a whisper voice, or maybe reach out and touch you or climb in your lap. And you move towards those things with them. And you do it over and over again. And then we find ways to celebrate and kind of anchor that. So it could be that if there's a really fun thing that the child likes to do, we find a way to reproduce it. Maybe we'll take a picture of them doing that fun thing and put it up on the wall. Or if there's somebody whom they really love being with who's not always with them, I'll encourage them to record their voice on a little recording and put it inside a stuffed animal so the child can hug the animal, and as they flip the switch, they get to hear the voice of that favorite person. Or we'll take the perfume or cologne of someone whom they really love and spray it on an animal or a pillow or a blanket. I teach them to use lotion, to put lotion on their hands and lotion on their feet, or sometimes we'll use music. I remember in the past taking a little mattress and putting it under the grand piano, and a child who was highly dysregulated, put the child to bed under the piano, and I would very quietly play.
Wow, you are so creative. You are amazing.
And so little by little, the child was able to learn to calm down. I've even done that with a child with a severe trauma history, was terrified of going to the bathroom. Terrified. So went to the bathroom that was right across from the grand piano, and I would sit and play a pooping song for this child on the piano and sing the pooping song while this little itty bitty child was trying to go potty. And there's a funny story to that. One day I took this child out in public, and I remember we'd gone to a Barnes & Noble bookstore, and lo and behold, this child had to go potty in the Barnes & Noble, and there was no piano. So what was I going to do? So I take this child into the restroom, and I'm singing, and now we sing a potty song to this child to help calm them because they didn't have the piano there. And I remember there was a woman in a stall, and she goes, "Oh, I can't believe this." And apparently I really disrupted her potty experience.
Wow.
Singing the potty song. But we were able to extend that same feeling of joy because he would be distracted by listening to me play the song and sing the little potty song when he went potty, and it gave him enough of a distraction that he was able to let go and let himself go to the bathroom, even though he had a rather intense trauma history that interfered with that.
Right.
So we try to find ways to recreate the child's joy and pleasure and comfort, and then give the child the opportunity to give it to themselves. Like, so if it's like a picture, have you seen those pictures where you can have like a video and a voice? The child can press the button and see a little video of their favorite person saying, "I love you, you're wonderful, you're safe," or whatever it is. And children love that sort of thing. Oh my goodness, it's a lot of fun.
Your work is amazing. I wish everybody in the world could just come have a session with you, or you could stand up on top of the world and just share everything you're sharing today. It's so powerful. And it's not only the children that you work with, of course, that need to benefit from this. All kids need to learn this. And I go into schools and I teach meditation. I teach mindfulness. I was at a school in New Jersey recently, and they asked me to come in and speak to all the kindergartners, first and second graders. And I was in this gym full of a couple hundred kids. And kids have great imaginations, as you well know. And I said, visualize your peaceful place. Where's your peaceful place? And they said the beach or the mountains, or one girl said riding on a cloud. And then I would talk about mindfulness and being in the moment, and I would give them an opportunity to meditate. And I would say 80-90% of them got right into it. It was amazing. Kids aren't as caught up in our thoughts and our self-criticism and rumination. If you ever go to a playground in elementary school, kids are so much more carefree. They're so much more imaginative. And just think if every single student, every single preschooler could learn to access a place of inner peace.
Yes.
And at the end of one of my sessions, there was a boy who looked so happy and peaceful. He didn't say anything during my larger session. But as we were leaving, I slapped all the kids' hands and I said, "Buddy, you look so peaceful. Where did you go?" And he smiled and said, "Into my heart, of course." And somewhat foolishly, I said, "Well, into your heart?" Nobody had ever said that before. I said, "Why did you go into your heart?" And he looked at me like that was a foolish question. And he said, "That's where the love is." And
that's beautiful.
so the love within these kids, and I have clients, and I don't work with kids quite as young as maybe you do, but I've had 5 and 6-year-olds in my office practicing meditation, practicing visualizations, practicing deep breathing. They get this stuff. A lot of them have heard of apps on the cell phone as they get older, but most of them don't know much about Buddhism and mindfulness. They get it. They understand it because they are creative and they can use their visualizations. But I use it with adults too. One very anxious adult said to me that he always imagined he was a frog sitting on a log in a pond. And so we went to that place. I have so many images I use. I have like an encyclopedia almost of images my clients have used, and we brainstorm what do they need. So I really hope, along with all the wonderful things you're doing with these children with challenges who've been traumatized, it's so exciting to think you can teach them how to find a place of inner peace. You can teach them how to love themselves. You can teach them how to be resilient through the level of attunement that you're doing. And it just must be so exciting for you as you see their recognition. And it must be astounding for the parents that just don't know what to do. If nothing else, if the parents could simply imitate what you're doing. So your work is so profound and so deep and just so important. And again, as I said earlier, but it's all we all long for. We all long for understanding. We all long for somebody to get us, for sure.
And your book is important. Compassion is such a huge piece because that's the underpinning of everything I do. For the child who had trouble pooping because he had a trauma history, I'd have compassion for him to think through a way to give him an experience. And the compassion is the antidote to self-esteem.
Right.
And that might sound like a harsh thing that I just said. But I remember when I did my first master's in exceptional student education, there was this big, strongly held notion that self-esteem was this really big, important thing to teach children.
Right.
But the reality is, if you teach a child to have self-esteem and feel good about themselves without compassion, you're training a child to be self-focused, self-serving, and to not have care, compassion, or kindness, or a concept of humanity. Right. And so you wind up having children who might do a really bad thing, like, oh, I killed somebody, shot him with the first bullet. That's an insane notion to me. And I don't know how, as a society, we wound up having an educational system that focused so heavily on self-esteem. And I saw so many children coming through the educational system who were really good at spouting off about how smart they were, how talented, how fast, how gifted, how good looking they were, how expensive their leather jacket or their shoes were.
Right.
They had no sense of humanity. It was almost as if they were empty shells of humans.
Right.
So for me, compassion is the other half of that. It's almost like a coin has two sides.
Right.
You really can't teach self-esteem without compassion. It's just incomplete. So that's another reason why I was so drawn to your book, because the concept of compassion is needed. It's needed in the education system so that we can teach children to have compassion as part of their self-esteem, but it needs to be in therapy. We don't need therapists who are cold and calculated and distant and who are focused the entire time on whether they are transferring or whether there's counter-transference. We don't need that as much as we need people to show up and connect with others and have love and compassion and caring. And
without a doubt. And say to kids all the time, your worth, and adults, your worth isn't based on how you look, how much money you have, how fast you run, your level of intelligence. You're worthwhile, period. People don't often get that. Now, some people are more useful to society than others, for sure. I mean, I think President Obama and Oprah Winfrey create a lot more positive energy than Charles Manson, for sure. But we're all worthwhile. I've never seen a child that's not worthwhile. I don't believe in original sin. I flat out tell my clients they're inherently worthwhile, period, regardless. It's often a new concept to people. And again, I can be pretty convincing. And it's not about a self-esteem based on our talent, our intelligence, as I said. It's about just knowing we're inherently worthy. I've never met a human being that wasn't inherently worthy. As a Quaker, I believe in the inner light. I believe in our capacity for compassion and love, for sure. So if nothing else, we need to be teaching kids in school, you're worthy. You're just worthy flat out. Again, worthiness doesn't give people license. You can't say, I feel so worthy, I'm going to go take somebody else's box of crayons or call them a racist name. That's not what it's all about. But kids that do those things don't feel worthy. When we're completely worthy, when we're filled with self-love, we have no need to be superior or to put anybody else down. We don't get anything of it because we're out of it because we're already filled up. So I agree with you completely. Self-compassion is much more important than self-esteem. But I make a distinction between self-esteem and self-worth. Self-esteem tends to be based on going up and down based on the day's events or who liked us or who didn't like us. Self-worth is just inherent. It's something that's just there regardless. And we can teach kids this. We can teach the adults we work with this for sure.
And that's why I'm so happy that you are my new friend. So Nate Terrell, author of Achieving Self-Compassion, Giving Yourself the Gifts of Happiness and Inner Peace. How do we reach you? Tell us where to find the book.
Well, my book, Achieving Self-Compassion, can be found on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, other booksellers. I have a website, achievingselfcompassion.com, where I have sample chapters from my book. I have a newsletter you can sign up for. You can sign up for self-compassion coaching. I have a Facebook page, Achieving Self-Compassion. You can find my email on the back of my book. It's Nate Terrell at Verizon.net. But the most important thing is that if I can be a resource to you in any way, please let me know. And there's a lot of great books out there on compassion. So I would love it if everybody went out and bought my book. But you can all start today by being your own best friend, by setting good boundaries. There's a lot of great self-books out there. I hope you listeners watching this have read a lot of them. But it's more important to practice this stuff. And you have to practice it all the time. These are great strategies, but you really have to build up a discipline to make it a habit. And again, tell me again about your center. So how do people reach you? How do people contact you?
So our website is orchardhumanservices.org, and I will leave some little breadcrumbs so people can find you through our website as well.
Okay.
And I look forward to more conversations on the Compassion Chronicles.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your love and your caring. And again, I wish every parent was hearing what you had to say today.
Thank you so much.
Orchard Human Services.
Bye-bye.
Uplifting lives by counseling, educating, and caring. With Dr. Darleen Wodzenski.